Today, we have a very, very special event with a very special guest. And our topic today will be negotiating strategies for parents of children with disabilities. It's something that is very near and dear to all of us on this panel today. And just again, thank you for joining us. And as we dig into our very, very amazing topic, I'm going to do some introductions. And I am joined by Lucia Kanter Saint Amour. Lucia is a San Francisco attorney, law professor, VP of UN Women USA, and special needs parent and advocate for over 25 years. She is the author of For the Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation, which includes a detailed and poignant chapter on negotiating an IEP. Lucia, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Kevlin.
It's just this is such an honor to have you, and I'm just really excited to get going with this conversation. I'm also joined by my favorite co-host and longtime friend, colleague, Mr. Bob Britz, who is the founder of Career Coach Services and creator of the Career Coach System, a proven process to help people find meaningful, fulfilling, financially rewarding employment. He's an expert in human behavior and motivation and results-focused entrepreneur. Thank you both for having us on this program today. We appreciate it. So Lucia, let's expand on this fascinating subject. I know that how we met was not really conventional, and I noticed a post that you had really shared about 10 months ago. I looked it up last night, and it was a picture of you and your son painting your dog, I believe, in very vibrant colors. And in that post, you shared your contributions as a volunteer and advocate for a special program that you've been involved with for many years. And I reached out to you at that point, and I knew that we had a connection. So again, welcome.
Yes, thanks a lot. 10 months ago, and that was called Rainbow Lab. And Rainbow Lab now hangs in my son's room. And I don't know if you remember from the photo, but he was actually doing it upside down. I flipped the canvas upside down for him to contribute his part. So wow. He loved it. He loved it.
Well, and that really started our conversations. And just recently, of course, I followed you, and I've just really appreciated all of the work that you've done. And you're a very humble professional that has done so many great things in our industry and beyond. And then also in your own very colorful career and just everything that you've done. And I want to say that we're here because of a book that you have authored, and we're gonna get into that a little bit more. And this is The Forces of Good, the Superpower of Everyday Negotiation. And through this book, I just finished it. It really captured the true essence of professional negotiation in many scenarios that you have described in the narration that you so eloquently provided to us. So share us a little bit about how you got started, and then your why. Why did you get going in the world of disabilities?
All right, I got to correct you on something because this is important. You've referred to it as professional negotiation. It's everyday negotiation. And that's exactly what, and I'm going to pause for a second and say, no one here is trying to sell you a book. You know what? The way I think about it is I'm a deep expert and authority on a topic who also happens to have a book. What we want to do here today is really deliver some tips to people, and we will, because we have so many. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I had to write the book is, number one, there were so few women authors on the topic. So very few. And number two, most of the negotiation books that are out there are catering to an audience of the C-suite professional, the MBA, the sales and marketing professional, the attorney, guilty as charged. And I said, well, no wonder people think negotiation is this like otherworldly skill, that, ooh, you better don't try this at home, kids. Don't attempt this. You better hire one of us. And I'm like, that is utter poppycock. Don't save your money. Don't spend it on me. I gotta show you how to do it. And then the other thing I recognize is people don't want to read a book on negotiation. They just want to know how to do it. So if you're going to write a book, you better write one that's not just full of words, words. You have to really make it sort of yummy for the eyes. So that's sort of the background of the book. And as for special education advocacy, it's funny how the cards are dealt, because when I was a law student right here in San Francisco at UC California, University of California School of Law, San Francisco, formerly called Hastings, and I was a civil justice clinic student who took on a special education case. And little did I know how prescient that was going to be for my own life. And it was so fulfilling. I was so into it that as soon as I graduated law school and I was working my first job at a law firm in downtown San Francisco, I joined the Community Alliance for Special Education, their board of directors, and started doing pro bono work for them, and even got them signed on as a pro bono client for the firm. So I was doing special education advocacy well before I was a parent. And then I end up giving birth to my first son, who turns out to be severely autistic, as well as other things, epilepsy and other things. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting how this little incandescent soul is floating out there deciding where it needed to land, and he needed to land with me. And so my special ed advocacy is deeply rooted even before I was a mom, before I was even an attorney.
And we've shared some behind the scenes notes and some messaging as well. And I felt that I was just drawn to you because of my own personal experiences with my two girls who are almost 16 and almost 18. And there was zero experience with law. There was zero experience with negotiation, mediation, or anything. And it really was something that I wasn't really prepared for, but I rolled up my sleeves and I figured it out. And like your book references, do your research and plan and be prepared for those meetings and those negotiations, whether it's through an IEP or whether it's in your own life, whether it's two clients that you're working with or in the workplace. And I really picked up some wonderful gems from that, and just reviewing exactly reviewing. And how many years, how long, so what is that? Explain to the
right. Because you just said plan. So I had to drag this out of my cupboard, because this is the 3 months of preparation that I spent. And this was the binder from the foundational IEP for when my son turned 3 and was transferring from the regional center to San Francisco Unified School District. This is the 3 months of planning in this binder. And I will tell you this much: I never had to plan like this again. I did for that very first one. I knew I needed a very strong foundational IEP, because those services were going to get chipped away at every year. And I wanted to be able to make concessions. You need to be able to make concessions in a negotiation. So do this the first time, and although you do need to plan for every IEP, you don't necessarily have to plan like that. And that's one of the things I'd like to talk about is that, sorry, Bob, go ahead, because I can tend to just be loud. So what was that?
No, I was agreeing with the volume of what you were talking about. So yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And one of the things I did in that foundational IEP, and that I insisted on in every subsequent IEPs, I'd say, okay, we have our IEP date. Great. For any reports or assessments, get those to me ahead of time. Get those to me at least 48 hours ahead of time, so that we can review them ahead of time. Draft goals. I want to see draft goals ahead of time. And I would say to them, I do not want to spend IEP time with you reading your report to me, because then you know what happens? Then you're like an hour and a half into the IEP. They're like, well, we're out of time. So let's quickly go through the services we're offering. And then you feel really rushed. You can't think about it. No, that's not going to happen. I'm going to read it before. I'm going to be prepared, having read it. And we're going to be able to jump right in, because what ends up getting rushed in IEPs is the thing that matters most. It's the placement and related services, and they don't have enough time. Or then you say, and you know what? Never be rushed in an IEP. Never. Then you say, oh, we ran out of time. Going to have to schedule another meeting. All right. I kept them at the table for 4 months for that foundational IEP before I signed a final document.
And you had some tips, not only again with the disabilities aspect of it, but just in general, where the decision making, the mediation is so much more of a fulfilling win-win situation. But when it comes to working with school districts and disabilities, they already have made their decision before you get to the table. So the 5 days prior, the information that you need to, really what I gathered most was to be prepared, to be as educated as these people that I'm going to be meeting, and I have no idea what I'm doing, and to take it very seriously. So
Right.
here's just the last 2 years
Yeah,
for
looks
each child.
familiar. Yeah.
And and work full time, right?
Right.
And
Oh yeah. Yeah. And a new baby on my hip.
Bob,
Yeah, and on top of that, you've got two other elements. One, you have a family to try to take care of. And number two, which we haven't even talked about, is you're off running to do leaky gut syndrome checks. We're off to homeopathics. We're off to doctor visits, trying to find cures and adjustments and modifications for the ailments that these kids have. That's a full-time job in itself.
Yeah, it is.
Just
it absolutely is. It was funny. I used to joke that whenever, because my son at one point had a team of 14 interventionists, and there were maybe 6 of them who would say to me, now, for just 20 minutes a day at home, do this. And I would say, between all of the appointments I have to take him to and his nap, and then all the other things you're saying are just 20 minutes a day, it actually adds up to another 3 hours a day. And I have another baby.
Oh, yeah.
And these were all people who didn't even have children, much less a special needs child. So don't tell me about this, just 20 minutes a day thing, right? Because that you have no idea how that accumulates. Now, Kevlin, you said, the thing is they've already made up their decision before the IEP. They can't do that. No decisions can be made without the entire IEP team agreeing to it. So this idea that, well, they've already made a decision, that is not gonna fly. And in fact, that was tried on me. And I think it was session 3 of that foundational IEP back in 2007, where we showed up again, session 3, and I was told that a decision had been made about his physical therapy service. I said, a decision has been made. I was like, did I miss something? I don't remember a decision being made. I said, well, the team has to agree on it, and I didn't agree. I said, who made that decision? And she said, a decision has been made. And I was like, oh, now my spidey senses are tingling. You're using the passive voice. So I went around the table. I said, did you make, it was sort of like a version of Are You My Mother? Did you make that decision? No, I didn't. I ran around the whole table. I said, did you make that decision? And I went around the whole table, and every person said, well, I didn't make that decision. I said, well, it seems that nobody here made that decision, but the whole IEP team is here. So, and I'm going to pause just for a second to say, this is not an adversarial situation unless it becomes adversarial. So please don't go into it with that attitude. This is a relationship. Okay. And it's a long-term relationship. And I was somehow able to foster that, like, don't mess with me. And I'm not going to mess with you either. Like, I'm not making outrageous demands. Anything I'm asking for, it is high, specific, justifiable demand. And I would never ask for the best. I would never even use the word best in an IEP. In fact, don't use the word best in an IEP. Eliminate it from your vocabulary. Because, well, we're not obligated to give you your child the best program. We give them an appropriate program. So you have to eliminate that word from your vocabulary in an IEP. You use the word appropriate.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then at some point in the IEP, if they say, well, we don't have to provide the best program, my little gimmick was to have it. You can have this in your pocket. What you do is you mock up what the best program would look like. You just have it there. You just have it handy. So when they say that, you could pull that out and say, I'm not asking for the best. In fact, you could pass it around. I passed it around the table. I said, this is what the best program would look like. Notice that I am not asking for this. I am only asking for what is appropriate. Extremely effective.
Extremely effective. And I was also, when you just said that it was tried early on, it was tried early on for me as well. And then I got to studying, and then I started studying ed code, and then I started studying federal code, and then I started studying laws and our rights and the SERR, which is educationally related handbook.
Special Education Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, SERR. Mm-hmm.
And it really showed me that when I came to the table, because the kid's dad was not, he was not really participatory at a lot. It was more on me, and I got good at coming to the table. The decision's already been made, and then I would go around, and I would already have my information 5 days prior, so I already knew what they decided. And because my kids had anxiety disorders, it wasn't on the academic side, it was on the social emotional side, which early on they kind of pushed that to the side and pretended that that wasn't really a classification or an element that could provide eligibility. And so I got really I rolled up the sleeves, did a ton of research, and I was able to, cite code. I was able to have my printouts ready, and I was able to say, so who actually did the assessment on my child? And were they qualified? Did they have the level of expertise and experience
Mhm.
necessary to make them a professional or an expert on the subject matter in which
Mhm.
they're assessing? Oh, they didn't. Well, then it doesn't count. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and request an IEE right now, because I'm going to get a third party, and you're going to pay for it because your team is not qualified to do the assessment in which you're finding non-eligible. So, I mean, it was years,
Mhm.
Lucia and Bob, where it was just these roundtable and the emails, and they're not
Yeah.
available, and well, we have never done that before,
No,
and
I'll get to that in a minute. But we gotta let Bob talk though too. So.
yes, but
Well,
go ahead, Bob.
I just want to ask a question. I'm listening to you guys go through all of this, and I'm wondering, and I'll use this word carefully, but how misogynistic or discounting are they of you as a parent coming into this?
I didn't feel the misogyny so much in the disabilities world. In the corporate world, I did, and they didn't even know what I was going through on the other side. So that's a whole different, subject on that. But the misogyny wasn't
Mhm.
there. The person that I always had a hard time with was the psychologist, because they didn't believe that anxiety was really, an eligible disability or an
Thing.
eligible disorder to find that you could qualify for services, right? And so I had to beat
Mhm.
them. And what I would do, going around the table, Lucia, I would say each person, and whether or not they had a little pearl necklace on or they were 30 minutes late with their new Starbucks, I would go and I would say, what is your level of expertise and experience in the disorder in which we are talking about here? And I would go and I would do the awkward moment of silence, which I love. I
Yeah.
want to get into that a little bit more. And
Yep.
they would sit there and, well, I saw it on 60 Minutes, or
Hmm.
I read something on YouTube,
Hmm.
and then I would look at the psychologist. I said, so who's taking notes? Obviously you've got to have your administrative designee always. You can't have a meeting without that. But these are things that you start learning as you go along. And the item too, Lucia, is not everybody's like you and me. Not everybody has that fight. Not everybody has that advocacy ability to go and face these teams of people that want to say no,
Take
because it's
someone
all,
with you. You should
oh,
always take
absolutely.
someone with you. Hmm.
Absolutely. And I don't even know where I got this innate ability to do this times two children. But, 16 years later, here we are. And I have two of the most high level IEPs of anyone that I've ran across in my experience, times two. And it's been something that has affected my career. It's affected, because IEP meetings don't happen at 6 a.m. They happen at 1:30 in the afternoon. They happen
Right.
at 3 p.m. after school. So there was always that too. There was that balance of needing to leave early to go and
Yeah.
attend to these meetings that were 2 and 3 hours long back in the day.
Right, back in the day, and then it
Yeah.
still wasn't enough time, and these are
Right.
also people who have been teaching all day and they're tired. And you talked about how you were researching the laws and reading all the, really educating yourself. And I would say research the people. If you're not researching the people, you're only doing half the job. You're only doing
Yeah.
half the preparation going in. You need to know who you're dealing with, not just names. Do some internet, do some sleuthing, ask around. What makes them tick? What's their deal? How do they operate in the past IEPs? I got a lot of intel on just people before I went into that foundational IEP.
Well, what was nice
Hmm.
too is that because I was met with such adversarial people so early on, that I ended up getting some support within the district, that they would support me silently, but they knew the
Mm,
hard work that was going on, and I would get tidbits, and I would get, "Try
right.
this person, talk to this person, I can help you," and it was you cannot do these things long term adversarially because you're not going to win. You have to be able to really package this in a way that you're gonna be playing in the same sandbox with these folks,
Well, yeah, you
and
want them to like you. This is a basic of
yeah,
negotiation. This
yeah.
is like negotiations. I think that's chapter 2 of the book, which is the book that really built. It's in chapter like rapport, rapport, rapport. It never goes out of style, and it's the thing that I see people skipping over in video conferencing these days, and then they wonder why they get stuck. Well, you spent no time engaging in some rapport. It goes a long way. And you're going to be in a relationship with this district if you're staying the same one like we did for 15 years or longer. I mean, my son's in an adult transition program now with the school district, so longer than 15 years.
So can we talk about there were so many, like I said, I mean, I can't even, there's all this. This is just notes from your book that really resonated with me. And there were some gems in here that I cannot wait to actually go back and start note taking. But the prime techniques for negotiating, really anything. Can we talk about those a little bit, like different scenarios and what to do in response to those scenarios?
Sure, pick one.
I okay.
You've already talked about one that's extremely important, and it actually doesn't come till chapter 10 out of 18 chapters, but it's so terribly important, and women don't do enough of it. And it's asking questions, all kinds of questions, and understanding what the intent of the question is, like what is it information gathering? Is it curiosity? Is it just a stall tactic? Is it a question at all? Or is it a statement dressed up as a question?
I
You
love
know,
those.
yeah, really
Yeah.
curating questions, and then noticing how the questions are answered or are not answered, they're skirted. Then the trick is that's half of it, is getting good at asking the questions. Then you have to listen to the answer. You got to listen to what's being said and what's not being said. Bob.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you start meeting with a professional anywhere, doctor, dentist, car mechanic, it's always the quality of the questions that they asked that ground their expertise.
Mm.
And if you're the parent coming in with these questions that are solid, you're going to put them on their ear a little bit because they're not ready, obviously, which is what you want. But it also establishes your credibility in a really solid way. And they will not mess with you again if they find out that you're well prepared. And that's just the secret to almost all negotiations and conversations.
Right, well prepared, and that, like, hey, we're partners here, and we're going to be partners. Let's make this an effective and supportive partnership, because I can be your best supporter too.
Yes.
Yeah. Or I could not be your best supporter. And they have to realize that, it's like the cheese thing, right? If you can attract them in with enough cheese to make them your partner, you're in good shape. But if you have to flip it, you got the power to do that as well.
So there were
Because your respect is there.
Yep. Yep. There were a few stories that you segued into, and they stood out to me. One was the Russia story. One was a young attorney and in a big office full of men for the most part, and your ability to listen was your superpower. And
Yeah, well, yeah. So that is actually how to be the most powerful person in the room. It's listening. It's just listening, and it's how you accomplish that. And yeah, that first story was when I was like 27 years old or something, and I was in that longshoremen's meeting, and I was the only woman. All these tough guys with no necks, and me, and I'm 5'2" and 110 pounds. After Thanksgiving dinner, and they.
Guys with no necks.
What's that?
You said guys with no
That's
necks.
what they look
Is that
like.
what you
That's an
said?
excellent interpretation. Good impersonation, Bob. And when I walked into the room, actually, into the conference room, it was right down there at the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. And,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I walked in there, and one of them actually joked, well, who invited I can't remember if he said president or secretary. I think he said secretary. Who invited the secretary of the Lollipop Guild? referring to me. And they all laughed. They all laughed at me. And then he told me to go sit in the corner. They put baby in the corner. And
Oh,
so the chair is in the corner. And I remember it was so big, like all conference room chairs are too big for me. And I was like, my feet actually didn't even touch the floor. So I looked and felt ridiculous. And I was just told that I was invisible and to stay that way. So and this is where I had this is an old reference, but like Gen Xers will get it. I had to MacGyver the situation. That is to say, okay, what tools did I have at my disposal? And these are tools that you have. They're analog and they're portable. Listening. I had my observation and my listening skills available to me, and I used them. And I ended up that day being the person who noticed something as I was listening that was inconsistent with documents. And then we were driving back to the office with the partner who brought me, and I said, well, first I said all the prefatory things that women say. I said, oh, well, you probably already thought of this, or this may not be very smart, or I probably don't know what I'm talking about. But did you notice that when that guy said this, and that actually doesn't match that, and that really didn't make sense to me? This senior partner, he pulls the car over and he turns off the ignition. Okay, people didn't have electric cars back then. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get fired. I'm about to get fired just for sheer stupidity. And no, he hadn't noticed it. No one had noticed it. I was the only one who noticed it. And it was an observation that completely pivoted the course of the negotiation.
wow.
So, all right, true story. And then the Russian one, which I'm not going to go into because it was the time I was held hostage at gunpoint in Russia the day after Yeltsin sacked his government in the Kremlin. Well, I was there, but I did not touch anything. Okay, it was a misunderstanding, and yada yada yada. I got out of it, and here I am today. The end. I didn't have any tools available to me that day either, other than listening and observing.
But it was really a fascinating story where you said, sometimes there's a time to walk away, and that's what the message that I got out of that story, and it's so true.
Yeah, I think that was in relation to another story. I think in the Russia situation, I was like, look, one factor I had there was an asymmetry there of time. And I calculated that I had all the time in the world because I didn't have anywhere to be, but they probably did have somewhere to be. And I probably just needed to wait them out and act really innocent and say the word American Embassy every few sentences.
That's right.
Yeah, they eventually did, like they had to go. And I was like, okay, so.
But your ability to be so quick on your feet based on the experience, and let's talk a little bit about the 10 years you've taught. I mean, I love where you referenced some of your processes and some of your techniques that you would use on your students. And there was one where I believe it was over a 10-year period where kids are typically, oh, you're going to make a great attorney. You're going to make a great politician because you talk or you have the ability to debate, what have you. And then you ask another question, how many people have been applauded for being good listeners?
How many of you were told as a kid that someday you'd make a good attorney because you're a good talker? And lots of arms will go up in the air. And then I would say, how many of you were told as a kid that you would make a great attorney because you were a good listener? 2 University of California law schools over more than 10 years, not a single arm went up in the air in response to that question. It's a terribly underutilized skill. And you actually, you might be thinking, well, I'm a good listener. And, I'm sure you're awesome. And I'm not trying to undermine that. And I also bet you're not as good a listener as you think you are. People talk even more than they think they're talking.
And as you mentioned several times, that's why we have 2 of these and 1 of these.
Right. Use them in that proportion.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm very aware of like right now I'm supposed to be talking. So I'm talking. Like when I talk, I talk. And when I listen. But I can't come on a LinkedIn Live and be quiet. So I'm very aware of how talkative I am right now.
I love it though. I love it. And I love listening to your voice throughout the audiobook. That was something that it really tied the information and your personality and your just your dedication and diligence and just everything. I was hoping I assumed that was your voice because there were some references that you referenced yourself. So I'm like, okay, she's reading this. This is fascinating. And to be able to read the entire book with such a delight and the fluctuation of your tone and you just really bring the audience in and you make it so that it's enjoyable and understandable to the person that's listening to it.
Yeah, you got to demystify negotiation. And that was why I had to narrate it, because I really was like, hey, I'm talking to you. I'm sitting right next to you on the sofa, like painting my nails and talking in your ear. I'm right here I'm talking to you, not, the C-suite. I'm talking
and I
to
felt
you.
that.
Right.
Yeah, like the dog walker and the stay-at-home parent and the nurse and the high school teacher. Yeah, Bob.
I was just remembering you talking about negotiations and listening. I remember there's one line that I have used for decades. It's after listening to all the arguments and all the pros and cons, and it just can't be done. And the question I ask is, the last time you had to get something done that you couldn't do, how did you do it?
And that's a mediator question, right? That's something mediators will ask parties, or they'll normalize it and say, look, when others have been in this kind of a situation, this is what they've done. And it helps people realize, like, look, people have been in this foxhole before and they found their way out, and so can you. And on that point, Kevin, you said this earlier, and it's something that I do want to make sure we steer this back to specific tips for parents of children who are negotiating IEPs. You said when they say, well, we don't do that, or that's never been done before. That's not, I wouldn't take that as just a shutdown. I talk about that very situation where I was told that and what I did. That is not necessarily an answer that you have to accept. No. And it might be a time to gently remind whoever has just said it, that the I for IEP is individualized, and that this needs to be assessed on an individualized basis. And then maybe there's some way that you can frame it that is a lot more digestible for them. So all right, we talked about getting the reports and assessments ahead of time and the draft goals. I wanted to also talk about how important those goals are and the document itself, because goals need to be really, really well drafted. If your student is accomplishing the goals too easily, then they can say, well, look, they don't need this service, and they can yank the service, right? For a goal that's too broad or not high enough. And for a goal that is too rigid, they can also yank a service and say, well, the service isn't efficacious because they're not reaching the goal. So that's why goals have to be like the Goldilocks, just right, high, specific, justifiable, and why you want to look at those in advance, because you may have some ideas and it has to be really like, they're going to learn to speak, 50 more words or something like that. Well, okay, 50 words just in the therapy session, just in the pull-out session, you want to make sure that that's in, well, what percentage of the time? Is it 80% of the time? Is it across context? Is it just in the classroom? Are there any prompts involved? If there are prompts involved, what kind of prompts are they? And how are those prompts going to be faded? Okay, and that's just an example of so-and-so will add 50 words of their vocabulary, and how, no, you need to be a lot more specific than that. So goals have to be very artfully and specifically crafted. And if you're ever feeling confused in an IEP, because there's a lot of jargon, and I hope we've been careful about it in here. There's a lot of jargon, and whether it's jargon you're confused about or anything else, if you ever find yourself confused in the meeting or reading the document, which are not very user-friendly, and this is a lawyer talking, okay, don't stay confused. If you're confused, it is not because you're a dummy. It's because something is confusing. So you better get clarification on, and they can't read your mind either. So you got to get clarification on that point. And erosion of services over time, this is where your preparation is really going to pay off, because you're not just preparing for the IEP and your high, specific, justifiable requests. You need to prepare a concession plan. part of negotiation is that you've got things that you can concede. And you can even have some decoy concessions because they don't know if a concession is real or a decoy. They don't know. And you don't know if one of their concessions is real or a decoy. It almost doesn't matter. But you have got to go in with a concession plan for what, because you've got to give a little. You've got to give a little. They've got to give a little. And whatever they offer you for their first offer, take it as that. That's their first offer. Because I have been in too many IEPs with families say, maybe don't speak English as their first language. Okay, and then make sure you get an interpreter. And that's no cost to you. And they're so grateful. They get like the bare minimum. They've these services, and they're like, wow, this is so great. And I'm like, no, it's not great. This is great. They're throwing you crumbs, you know, and they're just like so grateful because they feel like, well, whatever, we'll take whatever, you know. So it's their first offer, and treat it as their first offer. And don't sign it right away. Let's even say you agree to everything. And towards the end, when my son was, you know, in high school, and like, I was hardly even negotiating anymore. I mean, we knew each other, and they knew, you know, and I'm like, yeah, this looks good. I not once signed on the day. I always took it home with me and went through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure everything was worded correctly. They didn't forget to check the box for extended school year or transportation, that concerns that I had that didn't fit into the software, they were noted in the continuing notes. I made sure everything was in that document. You make sure everything is in that document. If it isn't in the document, it doesn't exist. So take your time with it. Have someone else look at it.
Excellent points. And I will tell you firsthand that the goals, you have to be specific, and they have to be fourth grade level specific, and it has to be obviously for the child's specific disability, and it has to match that. But it was always really interesting. We'd come back, we'd have the IEP, so and so has met their goal 10 of 50 attempts. I'm like, what of who? Who did they attempt this? And so I became so savvy at those goals, and it takes one goal to carry an IEP. And I always knew that the safety was an issue for my girls, because you talked about the amygdala earlier in your book. And with my girls, there are times in an emergency situation, they would shut down, and they were absolutely physically unable to verbally communicate. So I was able to keep in the self-efficacy and the self safety. And it was really something that every time they would try to reword the goals or dumb down the goals or take my goals that were set in stone as my Goldilocks, and they would modify them a little bit, and I would come right back. Nope, that's not the original goal.
Unless it is better. Unless it isn't better. Like, please be open. I want to say to people, like, please listen to them and be open-minded about, you know, they have done this more times than you have. Yeah, Bob.
I have a question. When you're approaching these panels of people, is it their goal to save money for the district, or is it their goal to try to really help your kid?
It's not an either or. And there are so many paradoxes, especially in public education, where resources are so slim. And, you know, I really do believe that people don't go into public education, not teachers, not principals, not administrators, to screw kids out of an education. Okay, I really do believe that.
Hope not.
Having said that, resources are always like that elephant in the room you're not allowed to say, and they're not. They are not allowed to say that's too expensive. Okay, cost can't be a reason. The reality is it is. So, and I've come across, you know, like the new, you know, occupational therapist, right? Who, rather than necessarily advocating for what's really best for the student, is really trying to prove herself to the district and showing that she's really going to save them money. And I've seen that dynamic where I'm like, I think your loyalties might be divided. And by the way, this is very common in just human behavior. Bob, you're an expert in human behavior. Loyalty, especially the tension between loyalty and what's the other one, Kevin? I talk about it in the thing. Loyalty and justice, right? This is a very common tension. Well, can be divided loyalties with someone on an IEP team in terms of what their allegiance to the student and what's in the interest of the student, and their allegiance to the school or the district. Right? These are human beings, so it's not an either or.
You know, When we
Good.
first got
Good to hear.
started, there was no playbook. There was no, "This is how you go through the IEP process. This is how you go through the 504 process." There was 0 of that, and I remember just phone calls. "Where do I go? Where do I go? Regional center. Okay, my kids are there." And
Yeah.
it was this years-long goose chase of trying to find the resources that were appropriate to my children's disability and getting sign up where they actually could help me somehow through the district, or they can help the district help me. And I tell you, this is I would always tell people, so pretend that you are going through a court case, because this is about as intense as it is. And you need to be able to prepare and plan your future for your child, because you're going to be their voice and you cannot give up. And
Yeah.
a lot of parents also were like, "Well, I don't want to get him mad at me. I don't want to get the principal mad at me." And I said, "You're not dealing with the principal. You're dealing with the district at this point.
Right.
You're
You
kind of
can be
going
firm and friendly.
firm and friendly, and
Friendly.
this isn't gonna be overnight. And our districts are not put in place to cure our children. And it's a team effort, and it stays a team effort. And the other challenge that I had along the way was the attrition in the district, where we would have Danielle one semester or 1 year, and Danielle moved on to, another opportunity, and Danielle was no longer
Right.
there.
That's right. Yeah. A lot of
So
turnover. Yeah,
that
we did that too. So you kind of, I always saw myself in the position of like, I was the anchor, right? So I'm the one who's going to like
Yeah.
train up the new kids, the
Yes.
new IEP team
Yes.
member. I saw that as sort of my job. And, you call it, sort of, it is like preparing for a court case. And that's unfortunate, because the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, IDEA, the federal law, was actually drafted to not need an attorney. You were supposed to be a lay person who was able to use it. And it's just not the case. It's just not the case. And then unfortunately, when you do go to some sort of like workshop, that's put a free workshop for parents and how to do an IEP, a lot of the times it's like, it's the laws. And I'm like, okay, yes, of course it's helpful to know the law, but tell me how to do it, which is what I hope we're doing here. There were 2 other points I want to make sure I made before we left. And one is this idea of power versus leverage. People use those terms interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. Power is not the same as leverage. And the setting of the IEP is a really good example of how to distinguish the two. They are the more powerful party. All right. Nothing's going to get started or put into place unless they turn those knobs and, move those levers up and down. Okay. They just have the power. They've got the staffing, they've got the resources, right? You have leverage. You as the parent have leverage. They have to get a deal, and they can't get one unless you sign off on it. And you can sign off on part of it, so you can get that going, get that placement going, get that speech therapy going, right? And not agree to some of it and continue to negotiate that. They can't get a deal without you. That is your leverage. So please remember that you have that and learn to use it. The last point I wanted to make, or a point I wanted to make sure I made, is please remember the siblings. The siblings who are neurotypical, who don't have a disability, they often get lost in this whole shuffle because their sibling with a disability is so resource intensive. So attention uses up so much attention. And so they kind of learn to marginalize themselves and just not be another source of stress for mom and dad. And over the years, that can then display in, truancy, depression, dependency, all kinds of things. When they become teenagers, they're also the person who is most likely going to have the longest relationship with that person with the disability, not you as the parent. Right. If they, and the IEP is like this black box, like what happens in an IEP? What goes on in there? Consider inviting them to the IEP, right? It could be really empowering for them. And also just make sure you pay attention to them. It's like the special needs family is one that's in triage, right? You've got to pay attention to the thing that's on fire, and it's usually your kid or kids with special needs. Remember the thing that's not on fire too. Those siblings need attention.
Excellent.
Right. I would also say that the if the husband's taking it to the school and the wife is working, she needs to be brought into the fold as much as the children do, and vice versa, because that parent who's supposed to be part of the triad of support gets left out while everyone's focusing on the resources over here. And I've heard and talked to parents, men and women who have felt very detached from their families because all of the efforts are being placed in one area. It's the same with cancer. It's the same with different other things. But, we often, we get the warrior on, right? And we forget we're married to somebody
Well,
at the
I
same
think the
time.
statistic is it used to be 80% of marriages
I'm sure.
ended in divorce. Those with kids with special needs is 80%. And I'm a statistic. Mine ended in divorce. Kevlin's, I think you said yours did.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but I will say that we did continue to be extremely effective partners in the enterprise of
Good.
advocating for our son. And we always went to the IEPs together. So it was always both of us at that IEP, even after we were divorced.
Well, and that was so important
that
too.
makes
At
a lot
least they
of
are
sense.
informed of the decisions that are being made. And in my situation, I would just look at him and if you have any questions, let's huddle. Let's not just blurp out because I had so much preparation that like I didn't want him to
Right.
say something that
Right.
showed our cards. But
Exactly.
I just this is such an exciting topic. And I'm so excited that you agreed to join us today, Lucia. And our work is never done. And this is something that, unfortunately, I was never really able to put this on my resume because I didn't want to have this on my resume as that I'm some, legal advocate that scared, an employer away. Right.
Yeah.
And so
Nope.
I never highlighted it. And it wasn't because I was embarrassed. It had its place. And I am just so proud of the work that you've done in this field and in this industry. And I know that you've empowered families and I know that you've empowered so many through your teachings and your classes and your sheer excitement of negotiation and mediation that
Yeah,
is just
it
love it.
really can change your whole and do it every day. Don't wait for the high stakes negotiation to try out your negotiation skills. I'm looking at a comment from Nioka. It's so hard when you're a single parent struggling to find help and answers. Yes, it is. It's already a lonely feeling to have a child with or children with special needs. I'm going to repeat it. Don't go into that IEP alone. Don't prepare for it alone. There are people in a community. There are people who can help you, even if it's just a friend who knows nothing about IEPs or special education. Bring someone with you, a second set of ears, a second set of eyes to look at the document. Don't go it alone.
One more item I just wanted to just hit really quick was, when you're going through these IEPs for the first time in your life, you don't even know what they are. You don't really even know what to expect. Oh, and by the way, you're dealing with a fresh diagnosis. You just learn that your child now has autism. You just learn that your child has a speech and language disability or whatever it is. Not only are you dealing with that aspect of this process, I mean that's huge. It's massive. It's life changing. And now you're up for putting boxing gloves on and trying to fight for your child's rights that can't for themselves. It's such an intense experience. And there are I live in California and I know that we all three do. And there are some amazing resources that folks can look up in their own region, in their own
There
areas.
are, and they're free, and this is
Yes.
one of them. And we're gonna put this on YouTube. If someone sends me like through a WeTransfer the raw footage, I can put it on my channel.
I will.
And one last point I want to tell you is that if you're getting regional center services starting at before age 3, please do whatever you can. I don't know if they're called in other states, but here in California, it's regional center services. And then at age 3, the school district takes over. Do whatever you can to keep them a client of the regional center continuously, so that then at age 22, you don't have to reapply.
And the other thing is take your time to sign your paperwork. Don't agree to a 504 if it's not robust enough for your child's needs. And it's not the end all. As for me, the IEP was really the process and the program that both my children needed, and I never agreed to a 504. Every once in a while they wanted me to get a 504, but it's
Right.
impossible to go from an IEP to a 504 and back. It's nearly
Right.
an act of Congress. So just be really
Referring to
careful.
Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, again, the lingo, right? And which was the precursor. It's like the baby IEP, if I were
Baby
to just sum it
IEP.
up.
Well, I am, and you
Good.
have a podcast. Can you just share a little bit about that? Because I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, I do. I have it's just a limited series podcast. I believe there are 22 episodes total. I keep them short. I keep them to about 15 or 20 minutes. And I think the longest one is like 35 minutes. It's Forces of Good, the superpower of everyday negotiation. It's on Substack.
Love it.
So
I
yeah,
love this conversation. I hope that we can engage with you again and maybe bring up another type of scenario or a topic that relates to our kiddos and how we can help other parents. You know, obviously this is an unending. It's out there and it affects our families and affects our communities. And again, I'm just delighted to have you on today and. We look forward to watching your journey and all that you do. And Bob, you know, has been an amazing supporter and advocate. And we go way back. And he's actually met my children and
mhm.
just, you know, both of you and what you do and Bob and you know, leading executives to fulfilling careers and Lucia, it's just a pleasure to meet you. And I, in respect of your time, we'll go ahead and end this show. But
It's respect to my dog's time. He's sitting here looking at me with his super sad face because we're supposed to be out on the trail right now.
he's like, enough already. All right, I've heard you.
That face. It's
But
pathetic.
but
Wonderful.
Lucia Kanter Saint Amour, it was a delight, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. And you all have a great Friday and a wonderful weekend,
Yes.
and we'll see you soon.